The gas lamps of England were beginning their soft, flickering dance in the twilight of 1910, casting long, wavering shadows across the cobbled streets of the village of Oakhaven. Outside the sturdy stone walls of the doctor's residence, the day's work was drawing to a gentle close. The last of the tradesmen were shuttering their shops, and the distant clatter of a horse and cart, fading into the gathering dusk, marked the final farewell of the working hours. Inside, however, a different kind of quiet was ascending, a more personal, settled peace that belonged to the end of a long and dutiful day. Dr. Alistair Finch's house was a comfortable, unassuming building, its ivy-clad facade blending seamlessly with the surrounding cottages. It stood on the edge of the village green, a sentinel of sorts, its windows offering a warm, inviting glow against the deepening indigo of the sky. Inside, the air was thick with the comforting scent of old books, beeswax polish, and the faintest, lingering aroma of yesterday's hearth fire. The grandfather clock in the hall, its mahogany case gleaming in the lamplight, ticked with a steady, resonant beat, a gentle heartbeat for the house itself. He had just returned from his final call, a visit to old Mrs. Gable who had been suffering with persistent cough. The journey back had been unhurried, the horse's hooves making a soft, rhythmic percussion on the damp country lane. The air had been cool and carried the earthy perfume of damp soil and fallen leaves, a promise of autumn's full embrace. Now, shedding his coat and laying his worn leather bag on the hall table, a sigh of contentment escaped his lips, a quiet exhalation of a day's labors brought to a close. The drawing room was a sanctuary, a place where the demands of his profession could be set aside, if only for a few precious hours. He moved through the house with familiar grace, his footsteps almost silent on the thick Persian rug. The room itself was a testament to a life lived with quiet purpose and a deep appreciation for simple comforts. Shelves laden with books, their spines a kaleidoscope of faded colors, lined the walls. A worn leather armchair, its arms smoothed by countless hours of use, stood by the fireplace, beckoning him with its familiar embrace. He paused for a moment at the window, looking out at the deepening twilight. The lights of the village twinkled like scattered embers, and the silhouette of the ancient oak tree on the green stood stark and majestic against the pale wash of the last remaining light. A distant owl hooted, a lonely, melodic sound that seemed to underscore profound stillness that had settled over Oakhaven. It was a world apart from the bustling cities, a place where the rhythm of life was dictated by the seasons and the gentle turn of the earth. With a soft rustle of his tweed trousers, he turned away from the window and walked toward the small writing desk in the corner. The lamp on the desk cast a warm, golden pool of light, illuminating the neat stacks of papers and the polished surface of the wood. He reached out a hand, his fingers tracing the cool, smooth grain of the desk, a tactile connection to the many evenings he had spent here, tending to correspondence or simply enjoying the quiet company of his own thoughts. The scent of ink and old paper, a familiar and comforting perfume, rose to meet him. He picked up a letter from the stack, its edges slightly softened with age. It was from his sister, Agnes, who lived in Bath. Her words a gentle echo of their shared childhood and the enduring bond that time and distance had failed to diminish. He settled himself into the armchair, the leather creaking softly in protest, and unfolded the letter, its paper thin and delicate between his fingertips. The lamplight caught the elegant loops of Agnes's handwriting, each stroke a testament to her careful attention to detail. As he read, his brow furrowed slightly, not in concern, but in thoughtful contemplation of her news. Agnes wrote of her garden, the late roses still bravely blooming, and the antics of her mischievous terrier, Pip. She mentioned a new acquaintance, a rather eccentric amateur botanist who had discovered a rare variety of fern in the Mendip Hills. It was a kind of gentle, unhurried news that formed the fabric of their quiet lives, a tapestry woven with small joys and shared observations. The world outside the drawing room continued its slow descent into night. The moon, a sliver of polished silver, began its ascent above the rooftops, casting a pale, ethereal glow. The sounds of the village had largely subsided, replaced by the gentle murmur of the wind in the eaves and the occasional chirp of a late-night cricket. Inside, the only sounds were the soft turning of pages and the steady, reassuring tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. He finished Agnes's letter, a faint smile playing on his lips. He carefully refolded it and placed it back on the desk, his mind already drifting towards the simple rituals of his evening. The prospect of a cup of tea, brewed strong and served in his favorite china cup, held a particular allure. It was a small pleasure, but one that he savored, a moment of quiet transition from the demands of the day to the deep peace of the night. He rose from the armchair, the springs giving a soft sigh. He walked toward the door, his movements unhurried and deliberate. The hallway was dimly lit by a single gas lamp, its flame a soft, warm glow that illuminated the dark with a staircase and the framed portraits of his ancestors, their stern gazes softened by the passing years. The air here was cooler, carrying the faint, clean scent of the disinfectant he used in his practice. His kitchen was a haven of order and practicality, a space designed for efficiency, but also imbued with quiet warmth. The cast iron range stood like a stoic guardian against the far wall, its black surface gleaming. The wooden countertops were worn smooth, bearing the marks of countless meals prepared and the many cups of tea brewed. A large window above the sink offered a view of the small herb garden he tended, its plants now slumbering under the cloak of night. He approached the kettle, a substantial copper vessel that had been a wedding gift many years ago. It felt cool and solid in his hand, its weight reassuring. He ran his thumb over the smooth, burnished surface, noticing the faint, almost imperceptible scratches that spoke of his long service. As he lifted it to fill at the tap, a soft metallic sigh echoed in the quiet kitchen, a familiar sound that always brought a sense of anticipation. The water, cold and clear, rushed into the kettle, its gurgling a cheerful counterpoint to the silence. He turned the tap off, and the sudden cessation of sound seemed to amplify the quietness of the room. He placed the kettle on the hob, the metal making a soft thud as it settled. He then reached for the box of matches, its cardboard worn smooth at the edges. Striking a match, he held the flame to the gas jet, and with a gentle whoosh, the burner ignited, a small blue flame flickering to life. He adjusted the knob, and the flame grew steadier, a steady, contained warmth that began its work. He watched for a moment, a flicker of satisfaction in his gaze, as the heat began to radiate outwards, promising the comfort of a warm drink, while the water heated. He moved to the cupboard where his tea was kept. He opened the wooden door, and the distinct, aromatic scent of Earl Grey tea, with its subtle notes of bergamot, filled the air. He carefully selected his favorite tin, its label slightly faded but still legible. He opened the lid, and the fragrant steam rose, a delicate invitation to the coming solace. He took out his favorite teapot, a stout, ceramic vessel with a comforting heft. He ran his finger around the rim, feeling the smooth glaze. It was a teapot that had seen many conversations, many quiet moments of reflection, and many shared cups of tea. He placed it on the counter, ready for the next stage of the ritual. The kettle began to hum, a low, resonant sound that gradually grew in intensity. The vibrations traveled through the hob, a subtle tremor that announced the imminent arrival of boiling water. He watched the spout, a faint wisp of steam beginning to curl upwards, a delicate signal of the water's awakening. The sound grew louder, a gentle crescendo, until finally a full, robust whistle erupted from the spout, a clear, joyful announcement that his tea was ready. With practiced ease, he lifted the kettle from the hob, its weight now considerable with the hot water. The steam rose in a fragrant cloud, warming his face and carrying the promise of comfort. He carefully poured the boiling water into the teapot, the liquid a clear, shimmering cascade. The teapot hissed softly as the hot water met the ceramic, and the aroma of the brewing tea began to intensify, filling the kitchen with its soothing fragrance. He let the tea steep for the prescribed few minutes, a period of quiet anticipation. He leaned against the counter, the warmth from the hob seeping into his back. The ticking of the clock in the hall seemed to grow louder in the stillness, a constant, reassuring rhythm. The moonlight, now stronger, cast elongated shadows across the kitchen floor, transforming the familiar space into something a little more mysterious, a little more ethereal. He took out his favorite teacup and saucer, a delicate china set adorned with tiny blue forget-me-nots. The porcelain felt cool and smooth against his fingertips. He placed the saucer on the counter and set the cup upon it, its perfect emptiness awaiting its fragrant contents. When the tea had steeped to his satisfaction, he lifted the teapot, its handle warm against his palm. He poured the amber liquid into the cup, the steam rising in fragrant tendrils. The rich, dark color of the tea was a visual promise of warmth and comfort. He added a splash of milk, watching it swirl and blend, transforming the dark liquid into a comforting, creamy hue. He carried his tea back into the drawing room, the warmth of the cup a pleasant sensation in his hands. He settled back into the leather armchair, the cushions sighing softly beneath him. The fire in the hearth had dwindled to a gentle glow, casting a warm, flickering light on the surrounding walls. He took a sip of his tea, the warmth spreading through him, chasing away the last vestiges of the day's fatigue. The silence of the room was profound, broken only by the crackling embers of the fire and the steady, unwavering tick of the grandfather clock. He looked around the familiar room, his gaze lingering on the worn spines of his books, the comfortable clutter of his desk, the framed photographs that held memories of loved ones. It was a space that held the quiet dignity of a life well lived, a life dedicated to the service of others, and a life that now found solace in these simple, unhurried moments of peace. He picked up a small, leather-bound volume of poetry from the side table, its pages thin and brittle with age. It was a collection of poems by Wordsworth, a poet whose verses often resonated with the quiet beauty of the natural world and profound depths of human emotion. He opened the book at random, his eyes falling on a familiar stanza that spoke of the gentle rhythm of the countryside and the quiet solace to be found in its embrace. The words flowed over him, a soothing balm to his weary mind. He read slowly, savoring each phrase, each carefully chosen word. The lamplight cast a soft glow on the page, and the scent of his tea mingled with the faint, papery aroma of the old book. Outside, the night had deepened, and the village of Oakhaven was now entirely enveloped in darkness, save for the distant, twinkling lights that marked the homes of its sleeping inhabitants. He turned another page, his fingers brushing against the rough texture of the paper. The poem spoke of quiet walks through meadows, of the gentle murmur of streams, and the profound beauty of a starlit sky. They were reflections of a world that felt both familiar and deeply comforting, a world that mirrored the quiet rhythms of his own life. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for these simple pleasures, for the stillness that allowed him to appreciate the beauty that often went unnoticed in the rush of daily life. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words and the atmosphere of the room wash over him. The gentle heat from the hearth, the comforting weight of the teacup in his hand, the soft scent of the tea and the old books. All these elements conspired to create a profound sense of peace. It was a peace that settled deep within him, a quiet contentment that came from a day well spent and the promise of a restful night ahead. The sound of the house, the ticking clock, the gentle creak of the armchair, the faint whisper of the wind outside, all became part of this tranquil symphony. He opened his eyes and looked back at the page, his gaze drawn to another poem, its title hinting at the quiet passage of time. He began to read again, his voice a low murmur, barely audible above the gentle sounds of the room. The words painted vivid images of rolling hills, of ancient trees, and of the enduring spirit of the English countryside. He felt a connection to this landscape, a deep and abiding affection for a place he called home, and for the quiet rhythm of life it offered. The village of Oakhaven slept soundly, bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight. The doctor, Dr. Alistair Finch, sat in his drawing room, a picture of quiet repose. The lamplight cast a warm, inviting glow, and the scent of his tea and old books filled the air. He was a man who found profound satisfaction in the simple, unhurried moments of life. And as the night deepened, he continued to immerse himself in the quiet comfort of his surroundings, a gentle guardian of the peace that had settled over his home. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed softly, marking the slow, steady passage of time, a lullaby for the sleeping village and its quiet doctor. The grandfather clock's final chime faded into the quiet hum of the house, leaving a silence that was not empty, but full of the gentle breathing of a resting world. Dr. Finch lowered his book, a sigh of deep satisfaction escaping him. The lamplight, a soft pool of amber, illuminated the worn leather of the binding and the delicate lines of ink on the page. He ran a finger along the edge of the paper, feeling its slight roughness, a tactile connection to the author's thoughts from a time long past. The air itself seemed to hold the day's quiet labors, a subtle blend of carbolic from the surgery, the fainter, sweeter scent of herbs drying in the pantry, and the lingering aroma of his supper. The hour was late, and the weight of the day, though not burdensome, was beginning to make itself known. He rose slowly from the armchair, the old springs groaning a soft protest that was more a familiar greeting than a complaint. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, each step measured and steady. The worn Persian rug underfoot offered a comforting softness, a familiar texture against the soles of his slippers. He made his way to the window, pulling back the heavy velvet curtain. Outside, the night was a deep velvety expanse, dotted with the distant, unwavering pinpricks of stars. The moon, a silver sliver now, offered little illumination, and the familiar shapes of the garden and the surrounding fields were softened into indistinct shadows. A gentle breeze, carrying the damp, earthy scent of the soil and the faint sweetness of night-blooming jasmine from the garden wall, stirred the lace of the curtains. He stood there for a moment, breathing it in, a silent acknowledgement of the world beyond his study. It was a world that was now sleeping, just as he was preparing to do. The quiet outside mirrored the quiet within, a perfect harmony that soothed the last vestiges of the day's concerns. He released the curtain, letting it fall back into place, and turned away from the window, a sense of peaceful readiness settling over him. The journey to his bedroom was a familiar path, lit by the dim glow of a single oil lamp left burning on the hall table. The polish of the banister felt cool and smooth beneath his hand as he descended the shallow stairs. The house itself seemed to sigh around him, settling into its nighttime stillness. Each creak of the floorboards, each whisper of air through a slightly ajar window, was a sound he knew intimately, a part of the comforting tapestry of his home. He reached his bedroom door, the brass doorknob cool and solid in his grasp. He entered the room, the lamp's gentle light revealing the comforting familiarity of his personal sanctuary. The scent of lavender, from the sachets tucked amongst his linens, mingled with the faint, clean smell of wood smoke from the bank fire in the hearth. The bed, a large, sturdy oak frame draped with a patchwork quilt, looked inviting, a promise of deep and restorative sleep. He began his evening ablutions, a simple ritual that marked the end of the day's duties. The washstand held a ceramic basin and jug, the latter filled with cool, clear water. He poured the water into the basin, the gentle sloshing sound of soft punctuation in the quiet. The water was cool, not cold, and it felt refreshing against his hands as he lathered the simple, unscented soap. The lather was creamy and thick, and as he washed his face, the sensation was one of deep cleansing, of washing away the lingering traces of the day's work. He rinsed his hands and face, the cool water a welcome sensation, and then carefully dried himself with a soft linen towel. The towel, well worn and impossibly soft, absorbed the moisture with a gentle efficiency. Next, he attended to his teeth, the familiar feel of his bone-handled brush and the minty tang of the toothpaste a comforting ritual. He brushed slowly and methodically, ensuring each tooth was clean, a small act of self-care that brought a quiet satisfaction. The faint minty scent lingered in the air for a moment before dissipating. He then turned his attention to preparing for bed, his movements still unhurried and deliberate. He unbuttoned his waistcoat, the smooth pearl buttons sliding easily through their buttonholes, and placed it neatly on the back of a chair. The unbuttoning of his shirt followed, each movement performed with practiced ease. The fabric of his shirt, fine cotton that had seen many washings, felt soft against the skin. He folded the shirt carefully and laid it beside the waistcoat, creating a small, neat pile. He then reached for the bedside drawer, pulling it open with a soft rasp of wood. Inside, nestled amongst a few other essentials, lay his nightshirt, made of the same fine cotton as his day's shirts, and a pair of warm woolen socks. He pulled on the nightshirt, the fabric cool and smooth against the skin, and then settled his feet into the soft warmth of the woolen socks. The bedclothes, freshly turned and smelling faintly of sunshine and lavender, beckoned. He smoothed the duvet, its weight a comforting presence, and then slipped between the sheets. The mattress offered a gentle resistance, yielding just enough to cradle him. The pillows, plump and soft, felt cool against his cheek. He settled himself, adjusting the pillows until they were just right, a small sigh of contentment escaping him. The lamp on the bedside table cast a warm, inviting glow, and he reached for the book he had been reading earlier, its pages still holding the echo of his thoughts. It was a collection of essays on natural history, and he found a quiet solace in the author's meticulous observations of the world around him. He read for a few minutes, his eyes scanning the lines, his mind beginning to drift. The prose was clear and precise, and he found himself appreciating the author's patient exploration of even the smallest details of the natural world. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, now more distant and softer, served as a gentle reminder of the late hour. The sounds of the house, the occasional settling creak, the faint rustle of leaves against the window pane, all contributed to a profound sense of peace. He felt the warmth of the bedclothes surrounding him, a comforting embrace that promised rest. The lamplight softened the edges of the room, creating a haven of tranquility. He let his eyes grow heavy, the words on the page blurring slightly, and allowed the gentle rhythm of the night to lull him towards sleep. The first hint of dawn was not a sudden intrusion, but a gradual softening of the darkness outside his window. A faint, pearly gray light began to seep into the room, chasing away the deepest shadows. Dr. Finch stirred, not abruptly, but with a slow, unfolding awareness. The sleep had been deep and restorative, and he felt a gentle readiness to greet the new day. The air in the room was still cool, carrying the faint, clean scent of night. He stretched languidly, the muscles in his back and limbs responding with a pleasant ease. The patchwork quilt rustled as he pushed it aside, and the cool air of the room met his skin. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his feet finding the familiar coolness of the wooden floorboards. The woolen socks, still on his feet, offered a touch of warmth. He stood for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the growing light, and then made his way to the washstand once more. The water in the basin was still cool, and he splashed some on his face, the invigorating sensation a gentle awakening. He dried his face with a soft linen towel, the familiar texture of comfort. The ritual of dressing was a mirror of his evening routine, but in reverse, and performed with the same unhurried grace. He slipped on his shirt, the fabric cool and smooth, and buttoned it carefully. The waistcoat followed, its familiar weight settling comfortably on his chest. He then donned his trousers, the wool familiar texture against his legs, and tied his laces with practiced hand. Stepping into his surgery felt like stepping into a different, yet intimately connected world. The air here was sharper, carrying the distinct, clean scent of disinfectants and the fainter, medicinal aroma of various tinctures and poultices. The morning light, now stronger, streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the rows of glass bottles and jars on the shelves, each holding its own secret. The examination table, its leather surface cool and slightly worn, stood ready, a silent testament to the day's potential demands. He moved to the large oak desk, its surface usually cluttered with case notes and correspondence. This morning, however, it was tidier, reflecting the quiet order he strove to maintain. He picked up the heavy cast-iron kettle that sat on a small spirit stove on a side table. Its surface was smooth and cool to the touch, and it had a satisfying weight in his hands, a testament to its sturdy construction. He carried it to the small sink, the metal clinking softly against his palm. Turning the tap, he filled the kettle, the rush of water a clear, bright sound in the stillness of the surgery. He placed the kettle back on the stove and ignited the spirit lamp. A small, blue flame flickered to life, a miniature sun, and began to warm the metal of the kettle. He watched it for a moment, the promise of warmth and refreshment to come. The kettle itself had a faint metallic scent, a clean, honest smell that spoke of its purpose, while the water heated. He began to arrange his instruments, a methodical process that brought a sense of preparedness. The gleaming steel of the scalpels and forceps, laid out on a clean linen cloth, caught the morning light. Each instrument was familiar, an extension of his own hands, and their precise placement was a quiet act of intention. He checked the small vials of antiseptic, ensuring they were full, and straightened the bandages, their crisp folds of visual reassurance. The gentle hiss of the kettle began, a soft murmur that grew steadily into a more insistent whistle. The steam, now visible, curled from the spout, carrying a faint, clean aroma. He lifted the kettle, its weight increased by the hot water, and poured it carefully into a waiting ceramic mug. The steam rose in a fragrant cloud, carrying the scent of the strong, black tea he always brewed for himself first thing in the morning. The mug was warm in his hands, a comforting heat that seeped into his palms. He carried the mug to his desk and sat down, the worn leather of the chair creaking softly beneath him. The first sip of tea was always a revelation. Hot, strong, and slightly bitter, it cut through the lingering sleepiness and sharpened his senses. The taste was robust, invigorating, a welcome jolt to his system. He let the warmth spread through him, a silent preparation for whatever the day might bring. The quiet hum of the spirit lamp was a gentle background sound, and the ticking of the clock on the wall marked the slow, steady progress of the morning. He picked up his ledger, its cover a deep, worn brown. The pages were filled with his neat, precise handwriting, detailing appointments, treatments, and the occasional home visit. He ran his finger down a column of names, his mind already beginning to organize the day's schedule. The faint scent of ink and paper rose from the ledger, a familiar and comforting aroma. The light from the window, now a clear, bright gold, illuminated the room, making the dust motes dance in its beams. He was ready, the quiet routines of his morning having smoothed the path for the day ahead. The ledger opened further, revealing a page with entries for the coming week. He traced the name Mrs. Gable with a thoughtful finger, recalling her persistent cough and the small boy with a scraped knee from yesterday's visits. There was a gentle rhythm to these entries, a predictable cadence of ailments and remedies that formed the fabric of his days. He made a small note beside Mrs. Gable's name, a reminder to check on a new herbal infusion he had prepared for her. The faint scratching of his fountain pen against the paper was a quiet companion to the ticking clock, each sound a small, steady beat in the stillness. He leaned back slightly, the chair groaning a little in response, and looked out the window. The garden, bathed in the strengthening sunlight, was coming to life. A robin, its chest a vibrant splash of red, hopped boldly across the dew-kissed lawn, its movements quick and purposeful. The early morning mist had mostly burned away, leaving the air clear and the colors of the roses, still damp from the night, remarkably vivid. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient oak tree at the edge of the property, its branches a familiar silhouette against the pale blue sky. A soft cough in the hallway announced the arrival of his housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, a woman of quiet efficiency and an uncanny ability to anticipate his needs. She entered carrying a small tray with a fresh pot of tea and a plate of buttered toast, the aroma of which mingled pleasantly with the lingering scent of ink. The clink of the china as she placed the tray on his desk was a delicate sound, a gentle interruption to the quietude. He nodded his thanks, his gaze returning to the ledger, and accepted the warm mug. The toast was perfectly browned, its crispness a satisfying contrast to the smooth warmth of the tea. He continued his work, occasionally pause and take a sip of tea or nibble on the toast, his movements unhurried and deliberate. The sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows across the room and warming the wooden floorboards. Dust motes, previously dancing in the light, now seemed to settle. Their brief ballet concluded. The world outside continued its quiet unfolding. The distant bleating of sheep from a nearby pasture, the only discernible sound beyond the walls of his consulting room. With his morning routine of reviewing appointments and preparing his mind for the day's work complete, a shift occurred. It was time to prepare the medicines and bandages for the day's expected visits. He rose from his desk, the worn leather of the chair sighing softly, and moved toward the dispensing area. The polish of the counter gleamed under the light, and the orderly rows of glass bottles, each filled with liquids of varying hues, were a testament to his meticulous nature. The air here carried a different scent, a subtle medley of herbs, tinctures, and antiseptics, a familiar and reassuring perfume. He began with the bandages, unrolling fresh lengths of gauze and carefully measuring and cutting them to size. The crisp rustle of the fabric was a clean sound, and the feel of the smooth cotton between his fingers was grounding. He then moved to the small bottles, his movements precise and economical as he measured out tinctures and mixed powders according to prescriptions he had made earlier. The glass stoppers, cooled to the touch, were removed with a gentle twist, and the measured drops fell with quiet certainty into their waiting containers. Each action was performed with a deep understanding of its purpose, a quiet competence born of years of practice. The small ceramic mortar and pestle felt solid and cool in his hands as he ground dried herbs into a fine powder. The earthy scent of the herbs released with each turn of the pestle, a natural fragrance that spoke of the fields and hedgerows surrounding his home. He worked with focused calm, his brow furrowed slightly in concentration, and the rhythmic grinding sound was a soothing counterpoint to the ticking clock. It was a task that required patience and a gentle touch, and he found a quiet satisfaction in the methodical nature of it. As he worked, the sunlight continued its slow journey across the sky, its intensity waxing and waning as clouds, thin and wispy, drifted overhead. The shadows in the room shifted, elongating and then shortening, marking the passage of time with an imperceptible grace. The distant sounds of the countryside remained a constant, a gentle reminder of the world beyond his immediate concerns. A blackbird's song, clear and melodious, drifted into the open window, its notes weaving themselves into a quiet tapestry of the morning. He placed the finished medicines into a sturdy leather bag, each vial nestled securely in its compartment. The bag, well worn and softened by years of use, had a comforting weight and a faint, familiar scent of leather and liniment. He checked the contents one last time, ensuring that everything was in order, his fingers running over the smooth glass and the rough texture of the linen wrapping for sterile dressings. The bag was a repository of his skills, a portable extension of his practice, ready to accompany him wherever it was needed. The morning routine was now drawing to a close. The spirit lamp had long since been extinguished, and the kettle, having served its purpose, sat cooling on its stand. The residual warmth from the sun streaming through the window filled the room, a gentle, pervasive heat that spoke of a day well begun. He stood for a moment, his hands resting on the polished surface of the counter, and surveyed the neat, orderly space. There was a profound sense of peace in this quiet diligence, in the meticulous preparation for the needs of others. A faint scent of beeswax polish, recently applied by Mrs. Higgins to the furniture, now mingled with the other aromas of the room, adding another layer to its comforting atmosphere. The polished surfaces gleamed softly, reflecting the sunlight in muted flashes. The air itself seemed to hold a stillness, a quiet anticipation of the day's demands, but without any hint of urgency. It was a calm before any small flurry of activity, the deep breath before a gentle exertion. He moved back toward his desk, the worn leather of his chair familiar comfort as he sat down once more. The ledger lay open, its pages still holding the promise of the day's engagements. He picked up his spectacles from their resting place beside a small inkwell, their wire frames cool against his fingertips. Adjusting them on his nose, he peered at the neat rows of names and appointments, his gaze sharp and attentive. The faint scent of old paper and dried ink rose in the pages, a familiar and reassuring perfume. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed a little louder now, or perhaps his awareness of it had simply sharpened. Each tick was a measured beat, a quiet reminder of the relentless, yet unhurried march of time. The sunlight continued its slow descent, the angles of the light shifting subtly, painting the room in ever-changing hues. The dust motes, which had momentarily settled, began their gentle dance once more as a new shaft of light found its way through the window pane. He reached for a small leather-bound notebook, its cover embossed with his initials in faded gold lettering. This was where he jotted down observations, nascent ideas for treatments, and sometimes semi-thoughts that came to him in quiet moments. The pages within were filled with his precise script, interspersed with occasional sketches of anatomical details or botanical specimens. The faint scent of the aged leather and paper was a familiar and comforting aroma, a testament to years of quiet contemplation. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves outside, and the distant sound of a farm cart rumbling along the lane drifted into the room. These were the sounds of his world, the quiet symphony of rural life that formed the backdrop to his days. He paused in his writing, his pen hovering over the paper, and listened for a moment, absorbing the familiar cadences. There was no need for haste, no external pressure to rush his thoughts or his work. The day was unfolding at its own deliberate pace, and he was content to move with it. He dipped his pen into the inkwell, the dark liquid swirling around the nib, and resumed his writing. The scratch of the pen on the paper was a steady, reassuring sound, a quiet declaration of purpose. Each word, each carefully formed letter, was an act of intention, a contribution to the orderly flow of his professional life. The sunlight, now a warmer, richer gold, illuminated the pages, making the ink appear even deeper and more resonant. He closed the notebook with a soft thud, the leather cover yielding with a gentle sigh. The small act felt significant, a punctuation mark at the end of a period of focused thought. He then turned his attention back to the ledger, his eyes scanning the entries with a renewed sense of purpose. The names and appointments seemed to hold a quiet significance, each representing a person who might be in need of his care. The anticipation was not one of dread or anxiety, but a calm readiness, a settled understanding of his role. The aroma of freshly brewed tea, which he had poured himself earlier, still lingered faintly in the air, a gentle, comforting presence. He took another slow sip, the warmth spreading through him, and felt a sense of quiet contentment settle over him. The room was filled with the gentle hum of the spirit lamp, though it was no longer alight, the residual warmth giving off a subtle scent of oil and metal. The ticking of the clock continued its steady rhythm, a constant anchor in the unhurried flow of the morning. He rose from his desk, the worn leather of the chair creaking softly, and moved towards a window. The garden beyond was now fully bathed in the mid-morning sun, the colors vibrant and alive. A butterfly, its wings a delicate mosaic of orange and black, flitted lazily amongst the roses, its erratic flight a pleasing contrast to the stillness of the room. The world outside was alive with its own quiet routines, its own gentle unfolding. He stretched his arms above his head, feeling the satisfying pull in his shoulders and back, a simple acknowledgement of his body's quiet readiness. The sunlight warmed his face as he gazed out, a feeling of gentle peace pervading his being. The day had begun, not with a bang, but with a whisper, a slow and deliberate preparation for whatever it might hold. He was ready, the quiet order of his morning having smoothed the path for the hours to come. The doctor's gaze drifted from the garden to a quiet lane that wound its way past the surgery. A solitary horse and cart ambled along, the rhythmic clop of hooves a soft punctuation in the otherwise still air. He watched it recede, a small scene of ordinary life playing out before him, and felt a familiar sense of connection to the rhythm of the village. It was a world of quiet dependencies, where the doctor's presence was as much a part of the landscape as the ancient oaks that stood sentinel at the edge of his property. He turned from the window, the sunlight still clinging to his face, and walked back towards his desk. The ledger lay open, its pages filled with a neat, precise script that he had so carefully cultivated over the years. He picked up his fountain pen, its weight familiar and reassuring in his hand, and uncapped it. The faint scent of ink, rich and slightly metallic, rose to meet him, a scent he associated with clarity and purpose. His first task was to enter the details of the visit he had made earlier that morning to Mrs. Gable, whose rheumatism had been troubling her. He described the dosage of her liniment and noted her slightly improved spirits, his pen gliding smoothly across the paper. Each entry was a small testament to the lives he touched, a silent chronicle of the village's well-being. He took his time, ensuring each word was placed with care, for in these quiet records lay the history of his practice and the people he served. The morning wore on with a gentle, unhurried pace. He reviewed a few notes for a patient with a persistent cough, making a mental list of possible remedies to prepare later. There was no urgency, no frantic rush, just a steady progression of tasks, each one undertaken with a calm deliberateness. The house itself seemed to settle around him, its old timbers groaning softly as if in contentment, and the scent of beeswax polish on the furniture blended with the lingering aroma of tea. Around 11 o'clock, the small bell above the surgery door chimed softly. He set down his pen and rose, the leather of his chair giving its familiar, gentle creak. He walked through the short, connecting hallway, his footsteps muffled by the Persian rug, and entered the consulting room. A young woman stood by the window, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, and when she turned, he saw a flicker of anxiety in her eyes. "Good morning, Dr. Ainsworth," she said, her voice a little breathless. "It's about my little boy, Thomas." He offered her a reassuring smile. "Come in, my dear, and tell me what troubles you." He gestured towards a chair opposite his desk. It's dark with polish to a high sheen. As she sat, he noticed the way she smoothed her apron, a nervous habit that spoke of her concern. Thomas, it turned out, had developed a fever overnight, and his breathing seemed a little labored. The doctor listened with quiet attention, his expression one of focused concern. He asked gentle questions about Thomas's appetite, his sleep, and any other symptoms, his voice a calm balm against the mother's worry. He did not interrupt, allowing her to tell the story in her own way. And when she had finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "It sounds like a common childhood ailment, Mrs. Davies," he said, his tone measured and reassuring. "But we must be sure." He reached for his medical bag, its worn leather a familiar companion. The latches clicked open with a satisfying sound, revealing an array of glass bottles, neatly rolled bandages, and small instruments, all arranged with meticulous care. The scent of medicinal herbs and antiseptic mingled faintly with the smell of polished leather. He accompanied Mrs. Davies back to her cottage, a short walk through the village. The sun was higher now, casting sharp shadows and illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Children's laughter drifted from a nearby garden, and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer provided a steady, rhythmic backdrop to their progress. The doctor walked with his usual measured stride, his gaze taking in the details of the village, the neatly tended flower beds, the laundry dry on the lines, the occasional nod from a passing villager. At the cottage, the air was close and warm. Thomas lay in his small bed, his face flushed and his breathing shallow. The doctor examined the boy with gentle hands, listening to his chest with his stethoscope, its cool metal a stark contrast to the child's warm skin. He checked his throat and ears, his movements slow and deliberate, and spoke to Thomas in a soft, soothing voice eliciting a weak smile from the boy. He has a touch of the fever, and his chest is a little congested. The doctor announced to Mrs. Davies, his voice still calm and steady. But nothing too serious, I believe. We'll give him something to bring the fever down and clear his airways. He wrote out a prescription for a cough syrup and a fever reducer, his handwriting as clear and legible as ever. He also advised Mrs. Davies on keeping Thomas comfortable, the importance of fluids and resting. Returning to his surgery, the midday sun had reached its zenith, casting a bright, unwavering light over the countryside. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed the hour, its resonant tones echoing through the quiet house. He felt a pleasant lassitude, the morning's activities having been both fulfilling and gently demanding. He poured himself another cup of tea, this time from a different pot, the water having been heated on the small gas ring in his consulting room. The aroma was more robust, the flavor deeper, and he savored the warmth as it traveled down his throat. He spent the early afternoon catching up on his correspondence, the scratch of his pen a familiar sound in the quiet room. There were letters from medical colleagues, notes from pharmaceutical suppliers, and a few personal communications. He read each one with careful attention, his mind absorbing the information with a quiet efficiency. The world of medicine, even in this quiet corner of England, was constantly evolving, and he made it his business to stay abreast of its developments. Later, he decided to tend to his small herb garden, a patch of earth behind the surgery that provided him with many of the ingredients for his remedies. The soil was rich and dark, and the scent of damp earth rose to greet him as he knelt. He carefully weeded around the burgeoning plants, his fingers deft and sure. The mint released its sharp, invigorating scent, and the lavender offered its soothing perfume as he brushed past. He picked a few sprigs of thyme and rosemary, their fragrance a pungent reminder of their medicinal properties. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange, pink, and gold. The light softened, bathing the village in a warm, ethereal glow. The shadows lengthened, stretching across the lawn like tired limbs. The sounds of the day began to fade, replaced by the gentle chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. He returned indoors, his hands smelling faintly of earth and herbs. He washed them carefully, the cool water a refreshing sensation. He felt the day's work drawing to a close, a sense of quiet accomplishment settling over him. He tidied his desk, placing the ledger and his inkwell in their accustomed places. The consulting room was now bathed in the muted light of the setting sun, and the spirit lamp on his desk, though unlit, still held residual warmth. He prepared a simple supper for himself, a slice of bread and cheese and a glass of ale. He ate slowly, savoring each mouthful, the quiet of the house amplifying the small sounds of his meal. The ticking of the clock seemed to grow louder in the deepening twilight, its steady rhythm a comforting presence. He found himself looking forward to the stillness of the night, a time for a quiet reflection and restorative rest. As darkness fully enveloped the countryside, he lit a single lamp in his study. The warm glow cast a pool of light on his desk, pushing back the encroaching shadows. He opened a book of poetry, its pages worn and familiar, and began to read. The words flowed over him, a gentle tide of imagery and emotion, and he felt his mind unwind, shedding the day's concerns. The quiet was profound, broken only by the occasional rustle of pages and the soft sigh of the wind outside. He read for a while longer, his eyelids growing heavy. The lamp cast a soft, golden light, and the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for him to succumb to sleep. He closed the book, placing it carefully on the desk, and rose. The house was silent, a sanctuary of peace after the gentle bustle of the day. He made his way to his bedroom, the floorboards creaking softly beneath his feet. The night air was cool and still, and as he drew back the curtains, he saw the stars beginning to prick the velvet sky. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the quiet rhythm of his life, for the privilege of serving his community, and for the promise of another peaceful night. He blew out the lamp, and the room was plunged into darkness, a darkness that held the promise of dreams and the quiet restoration of sleep. The darkness was not an empty void, but a soft, velvet blanket, settling over the room and over him. He found his way to the washstand, the cool porcelain of the basin a welcome touch against the skin. The pitcher, heavy with cool water, felt solid and reassuring in his hands, and the gentle slosh as he poured into the basin was a sound of quiet preparation. The water, drawn from the well earlier in the day, held a faint, clean scent of earth and stone. He splashed it onto his face, the coolness a soothing balm, and felt the last vestiges of the day's fatigue begin to ebb away. He dried his face with a soft linen towel, its texture a small luxury, and the faint scent of lavender from its folds was a subtle, comforting aroma. He moved toward the bed, the familiar creak of the floorboards beneath his slippers a sound of home, a ritual of the day's gentle closing. The sheets, cool and crisp from being changed, invited him in. He pulled back the heavy quilt, its weight of familiar comfort, and felt the slight give of the mattress as he settled down. The pillows, plumped and waiting, cradled his head with a soft embrace, and he let out a slow, contented sigh. The world outside the window had grown profoundly silent, the distant hoot of an owl the only testament to its continuing existence. Here, within these four walls, was a pocket of absolute stillness, a haven from the world's demands. He lay there for a moment, simply breathing, feeling the quiet seep into his very bones. The day had been full, not with dramatic events, but with the steady hum of ordinary life. There had been Mrs. Gable's persistent cough, young Thomas's scraped knee, and the reassuring news of the farmer's wife's improved health. Each small interaction, each moment of care given and received, contributed to the tapestry of his days. And in this quietude, he could appreciate its intricate, unhurried beauty. The lamp had been extinguished, and the darkness was now complete, a gentle pressure against his eyes, encouraging them to close. His thoughts, no longer tethered to the day's tasks, began to drift like leaves on a slow-moving stream. He thought of the ancient oak tree at the edge of the village green, its branches gnarled and wise, a silent witness to generations of lives. He considered the slow unfolding of the seasons, the predictable yet ever-new arrival of spring's blossoms, summer's warmth, autumn's fiery hues, and winter's quiet slumber. This rhythm, this enduring cycle, brought a deep sense of peace, a reminder of continuity and resilience. His own life, though seemingly small in the grand scheme of things, was a part of this larger, enduring flow. He felt a pleasant heaviness settle over his limbs, a delicious languor that signaled the body's readiness for rest. His breathing deepened, each inhale a soft filling, each exhale a gentle release. The cares of the day, which had seemed so significant hours before, now felt distant and unimportant, like shadows receding with the dawn. He let them go one by one, with a quiet grace, allowing his mind to become as still as the night air outside. There was no need to hold on to them, no need to replay or to plan. The present moment was simply this: the soft embrace of the bed, the quiet dark, and the approaching peace of sleep. The familiar scent of his own room, a subtle blend of old wood, beeswax polish, and the faint lingering aroma of the herbs he kept in a small sachet on his bedside table, was a grounding presence. It was the scent of his sanctuary, a place where he could shed the mantle of his profession and simply be. The sounds of the house, too, were familiar and comforting. The faint settling of timbers, the soft whisper of the wind around the eaves, the distant, almost imperceptible murmur of the countryside breathing. These were not sounds of disturbance, but rather the gentle lullaby of his own home. He felt his muscles relax, one by one, from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. The tension that had gathered in his shoulders throughout the day seemed to melt away, replaced by a profound sense of ease. His jaw softened, his eyelids grew heavier, and a gentle warmth spread through his chest. It was a physical surrender, a willing relinquishing of control to the natural, restorative power of sleep. He was not fighting it, but embracing it welcoming its quiet arrival. His mind, which had been active and engaged for so many hours, began to quiet its internal chatter. The usual stream of thoughts, observations, and future considerations slowed to a trickle, then to a few isolated drops. Images, perhaps from the book he had read earlier, might flicker at the edges of his awareness, but they were fleeting, insubstantial, and held no power to disturb his growing calm. He observed them without attachment, allowing them to pass through as he sank deeper into the embrace of relaxation. He was aware, in a vague and distant way, of the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, its steady beat a comforting anchor in the deepening silence. It marked the passage of time, not with urgency, but with a gentle, unhurried cadence, mirroring the slowing rhythm of his own heart. Each tick was a soft punctuation mark in the vast expanse of the night, a reminder of the world continuing its slow, predictable spin, even as he prepared to enter the realm of dreams. He felt a profound sense of contentment, a quiet satisfaction with the simple, ordered nature of his life. There was no grand ambition, no burning desire for more, just a deep appreciation for the present, for the small joys and the quiet fulfillment of his calling. This was enough, more than enough. It was a rich tapestry woven from threads of duty, compassion, and a profound piece of a life well lived, even in its ordinary moments. His breathing became shallower, almost imperceptible, and his body felt as if it were sinking into the mattress, becoming one with the quiet comfort of the bed. The edges of his awareness began to blur, the distinct sensations of touch and sound softening into a gentle hum. He was no longer actively thinking, but passively drifting, carried along by the irresistible current of sleep. The world outside his room ceased to exist, and even familiar walls seemed to recede, dissolving into the soft, all-encompassing darkness. His last conscious awareness was of a deep, pervasive calm, a sense of being held and nurtured by the night. The day was done, its task completed, its worries set aside. All that remained was this profound stillness, this gentle descent into the restorative embrace of slumber. And then, with a final, soft exhalation, the doctor drifted, leaving the quiet room and the sleeping world behind, surrendering himself entirely to the peaceful oblivion of dreams.